Remember, not that long ago, it was the Super Bowl. I mean, it feels like a lifetime ago with everything that has been happening in our world, the things that we have been going through together, yet isolated from one another. I was recalling one of the commercials that really struck my attention during that Super Bowl. And it was a commercial by New York Life. And the narrator of that commercial began with these words. The ancient Greeks had 4 words for love. The first is philia. Philia is an affection that grows from friendship. And next, there is storge. This is the kind of love that you have for your family, those who are familiar to you, love that you have for a grandfather, a sister, or a brother. And the third is eros. This is romantic love. It's an uncontrollable urge to say, I love you. The fourth kind of love is different, though. It is the most admirable of love. It is called agape. Love as an action. It is love that takes courage, love that requires sacrifice, love that requires strength. I'm grateful to hear New York Life's commercial talk about the various definitions that the Greeks had for love, but I have to say that they fell rather short in their definition of agape love. Agape love is the greatest of all loves. It is unconditional love, all-encompassing love. It is a selfless love. It is a divine love. And for us as Christians, it is a divine love that we believe is embodied in Jesus Christ. God's agape love transcends our brokenness. It transcends our fear, our shortcomings. And yes, it even transcends death. As we continue our Lenten journey through the examination of the various biblical stories that we have heard from the book of John and the book of Romans, and also from the French historical novel Les Misérables, we will consider today the various forms of love. We've heard about Jean Valjean over these past Lenten weeks. We've heard how he is the protagonist of this grand novel. Valjean, we heard, had served a lengthy prison sentence for stealing bread. Stealing bread to feed his sister's hungry children. This was a time in France's history of grave economic depression. And Valjean shows great affection, or storge as the Greeks call it, for his sister's children. This is that familiar love of families. It is so familiar to us, so encompassing of our lives that it's actually difficult for most of us to pinpoint the moment when our affection for our family members began. Jean Valjean cares for his sister and for her children, and he cares that they are hungry and in need. And when stealing bread becomes his only option to feed them, it is out of this storge, this affection, that he takes the bread. In the service of justice without mercy, we heard how Valjean was sentenced to 5 years in prison, and after numerous prison attempts is sentenced to another 14. So after 19 long, hard years, Jean Valjean is released from prison, having more than paid for his crimes. When he is released, people show no mercy to Jean Valjean. They show him no philia, no friendship of love. He is a hungry man. He is a thirsty man. And he wanders in the cold without adequate clothing or a warm place to lay his head. That is until that moment, that life-changing moment when he meets Bishop and Benvenu. Jean Valjean found mercy. He found philia, friendship, in Bishop Benvenu. This friendship changed Jean Valjean's life. The bishop gave him food for his hunger. He gave him drink to quench his thirst, and a warm bed for him to rest and to find reprieve from the cold. We have heard time and time again how Jean Valjean was caught stealing silver plates from the bishop, and when he is caught and brought back, instead of facing recrimination, the bishop says to him, "These were a gift, and you forgot the candlesticks. The silver candlesticks are worth more than the plates." He found grace. He found mercy. He found agape and philia love from the bishop. As a result of this gift of grace, we heard how Jean Valjean was transformed. He became a man of greater compassion and integrity, and also becomes a man of means. His transformation also included a name change, as Jean Valjean becomes Monsieur Madeleine. He establishes a factory in a small village and eventually becomes mayor. And he is a person in power who is concerned about his fellow human being. He shares abundantly this philia, friendship love, with all of those in the village, even the crankiest of them. He, like the bishop, cares for the least of these. In caring for others, he finds Fantine. We heard Fantine's story last week, once a beautiful and hopeful young single mother who had to resort to selling her beautiful hair and her teeth, and eventually even her body, so that she can support her daughter. This was a society that if you were a single mother, it was heavily frowned upon. You were not treated kindly. Fantine loves her daughter more than her hair or her looks or her body. She loves Cosette. Fantine sacrifices everything that she has in care of her daughter. When Jean Valjean meets Fantine, he recognizes that life has been extremely difficult for her and that she is quite ill. And he takes her to a hospital of mercy and arranges for her to be cared for by the nuns. He also promises Fantine that this child that she had to give up so that she could create a new life for her, that this child that was lost, that he would find her and bring her to her. Unfortunately, Jean Valjean is detained before he can begin his search, and Fantine is claimed by death before he can fulfill this promise. But he still fulfills the promise. He has this friendship love, this philia love for Fantine. He has compassion for all that she has suffered. And at great personal risk, he does go and he looks and finds Cosette. Out of a sense of this love, this friendship love, he risks a great deal to secure a safe place and a life for Cosette. But after some time passes, Jean Valjean, he realizes something. He loves this little girl as if she were his very own. This is a new feeling to him, this feeling of unconditional love for this child, this all-encompassing love, this self-sacrificing love. This child has come to mean the world to him, and he will risk even his own life to ensure her safety and her happiness. This is agape love. Martha and Mary, they send word to Jesus that their brother Lazarus, the one whom Jesus loves, the one whom Jesus calls friend. This love in the verse is called philia. Philia. Your friend is sick, they tell Jesus. And we also heard in the scripture reading that Jesus loved loved Martha and Mary and Lazarus. And the word used here, the love that Jesus feels for them, is agape, which means that Jesus loved them with an unconditional, all-encompassing, selfish, divine love. And we also heard, surprisingly, that Jesus did not rush to Lazarus' side when he heard the disturbing news that he was sick. What we heard is that he waited 2 days longer before he traveled to see him. In today's world and everything that we're all going through, we might have thought that Jesus was practicing social distancing. He was taking time. He was tarrying. But the truth is, he had another purpose for waiting. We also heard that this place, Bethany in Judea, was dangerous for Jesus, as the religious leaders there had previously tried to stone him and to kill him. When Jesus finally arrives, he is greeted, even confronted by Martha, and she says to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would still be with us. But even I know right now that God will give you whatever you ask." Martha is disappointed that Jesus has not shown up before now, but she still has faith. She is practicing lament. Likewise, her sister Mary also says to Jesus when she sees him, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." And with these words, she begins to weep. And Jesus also wept. Others saw Jesus' response, his emotion, his weeping and his crying, and they remarked, see how he loved him, philia him. Jesus wept because his friends were in pain. He wept at the sadness and the devastation that sickness and death seem to bring. And after he had wept, Jesus walked to the tomb of Lazarus, and he stood in front of it, and he demanded that the great stone be removed, and he challenged death. With a loud voice, Jesus calls to Lazarus, the one who is locked inside the tomb, the one who is locked inside the very boundary of mortality. And God's agape, God's boundless, selfless, divine love embodied in Jesus transcended death. Lazarus' raising is really a great love story for all of us. And any great novel is never complete without a love story. In Les Misérables, Cosette, Fantine's beloved daughter, who is cared for by Jean Valjean, she grows up into this beautiful young woman, and she meets a man named Marius, and they fall in love. And this romantic love is what the Greeks call eros. And this eros, this love that Cosette has for Marius and Marius has for Cosette, it causes Jean Valjean sadness and distress. It bothers him. Life is changing. Things are not staying the same. But even in the midst of that sadness, when it appears that Marius' life is at risk, Jean Valjean just decides that he must save him. Even at great personal risk to himself, Valjean rescues Marius after he has been wounded, and he carries him to safety using the sewer tunnels that run under Paris. This is indeed agape love. He safely delivers Marius home where he recovers, but Marius doesn't remember the events. He doesn't know that it was Valjean who rescues him. And Valjean, out of love for Cosette, allows her to marry Marius, even though he is filled with sadness. He even gives the couple most of the remainder of his large fortune. After Marius and Cosette are married, Valjean wants to be honest. He wants to tell Marius the truth, and he confesses to him his true identity. He explains humbly that he is nothing more than a thief and a criminal. He never once, not once, mentions the good that he has done. He doesn't even tell him that he saved Marius' own life. Valjean's confession repulses Marius, causing him at first to forbid Valjean from even visiting. He doesn't want Cosette near this man. Marius doesn't question, he doesn't prod, he doesn't investigate. He just merely accepts what he heard. And Valjean's heart is broken. But he loves Cosette more than anything, and he wants what is best for her. He accepts his banishment and disappears into solitude, but he slowly begins to lose his health. And Cosette, the man that she has called father, the man that she has trusted and loved, disappears from her life. When Marius finally discovers that it was Jean Valjean who saved him, and that he was a man who spent most of his life loving his fellow human being, he had philia for them. He takes Cosette and they rush to Valjean's side. And Valjean is near death at this point. But even facing death, he wants to console Cosette. And he reminds her that there is scarcely anything in this world, nothing in this world, but love of another person. If you watch the musical rather than reading the book, Valjean, together with the spirit of Fantine, Cosette's deceased mother, they sing together these words: love is everlasting, and that to love another person is to see the face of God. Agape love, defying even death. In this time when sickness and death consume the news, our thoughts, and even cast shadows over our relationships, let us remember God's divine love shown through Jesus, embodied in Jesus. In this story, what we can take away is that Jesus weeps with us, mourns with us, is troubled by our troubles. But Jesus, in the midst of sickness and the threat of death, reminds us that God's agape love transcends even death. God's agape love is the vehicle through which hope is rediscovered.